The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Bradley as soldiers prepared for what everyone believed would be a routine promotion ceremony. Captain Sarah Mitchell stood at attention in her dress blues, watching as her fellow officers adjusted their uniforms and checked their medals one final time. The ceremony was set to honor 3 officers who had distinguished themselves in recent overseas operations. Sarah had served 15 years in the Army, working her way up through the ranks with determination and skill that impressed even the most hardened veterans. Her colleagues knew her as someone who never backed down from a challenge, whether it was leading a difficult mission in Afghanistan or standing up for her soldiers when bureaucracy threatened their welfare. What nobody knew, including Sarah herself, was that this ceremony would change everything. Colonel James Harrison, the base commanding officer, stood reviewing his notes for the ceremony. He was a stern man in his 50s who had earned respect through decades of military service. The colonel took pride in running ceremonies with precision and dignity. He had personally reviewed each promotion file and felt confident that today's event would proceed smoothly. The base auditorium filled with family members, fellow soldiers, and local dignitaries. Sarah's parents had driven 12 hours from their farm in Nebraska to attend. Her father, a Vietnam veteran himself, wore his old service medals with quiet pride. Her mother clutched a small American flag, tears already forming in her eyes before the ceremony even began. Among the attendees sat an elderly woman in the back row, wearing a simple black dress with a single military pin on her collar. She had arrived early and chosen a seat where she could observe without drawing attention. Most people assumed she was someone's grandmother, there to support a family member. Nobody suspected that her presence would turn the entire ceremony upside down. As the ceremony began, Colonel Harrison delivered the opening remarks with his usual commanding presence. He spoke about duty, honor, and the proud tradition of military service. The audience listened respectfully as he detailed the accomplishments of each officer being honored. Sarah's turn came third. As her name was called, she stepped forward with practiced precision. The colonel began reading her commendations, listing her various deployments, leadership roles, and the Bronze Star she had earned for her actions during a dangerous rescue mission in Syria. Captain Mitchell has demonstrated exceptional leadership and courage throughout her career, the colonel announced. Her actions have saved countless lives and brought honor to this unit and the United States Army. As Sarah stood at attention, the elderly woman in the back row slowly rose from her seat. She moved with deliberate purpose, though few people noticed her movement at first. She walked steadily down the center aisle, her footsteps echoing softly in the large auditorium. The colonel continued with the ceremony, preparing to pin Sarah's new rank insignia. But, as he reached for the medal case, the elderly woman's voice cut through the formal atmosphere. "Excuse me, Colonel," she said firmly but respectfully. The entire auditorium turned to look at her. Colonel Harrison paused, clearly annoyed by the interruption but maintaining his professional composure. "Ma'am, we're in the middle of a formal ceremony. If you have a concern, please wait until we're finished." The woman continued walking forward, now just a few rows from the front. "I'm afraid this cannot wait, Colonel. There's something you need to know about Captain Mitchell." Sarah felt her heart racing. She had no idea who this woman was or what she might want. Her mind raced through possibilities. Was there some problem with her background check? Had someone filed a complaint against her? Colonel Harrison's jaw tightened. He was not accustomed to being interrupted, especially during such an important ceremony. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to return to your seat or leave the auditorium." But the woman kept walking. As she approached the front of the room, something about her bearing began to register with some of the older veterans in attendance. Despite her civilian clothes and modest appearance, she carried herself with an unmistakable military bearing. "Colonel Harrison," she said, reaching into her purse and pulling out a leather folder. "I believe you should see this before you continue." The tension in the room was palpable. Sarah's parents exchanged worried glances. Other family members began whispering among themselves. The soldiers on stage maintained their positions, but everyone could sense that something significant was happening. Colonel Harrison reluctantly took the folder from the woman's hands. As he opened it, his expression changed from annoyance to confusion, then to complete shock. He stared at the documents inside for what seemed like an eternity, reading them twice to make sure he understood correctly. "This can't be right," he muttered, looking up at the woman with new recognition dawning in his eyes. The woman smiled slightly. "I assure you, Colonel, everything is in order. The records may be classified, but they are completely accurate." Sarah watched this exchange with growing bewilderment. She had never seen Colonel Harrison look uncertain about anything. The man who commanded absolute respect from everyone on the base suddenly seemed almost nervous. "Ma'am," the colonel said, his voice now carrying a tone of deference that shocked everyone present. "I had no idea. The records we have don't show." "The records you have access to are incomplete, Colonel," the woman replied calmly. "For security reasons, certain information was classified at the highest levels. Only now, with recent changes in policy, can some of these details be revealed." The auditorium had fallen completely silent. Even the children in attendance seemed to sense that something extraordinary was happening. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she tried to process what she was witnessing. Colonel Harrison looked at the documents again, then at Sarah, then back at the woman. "Captain Mitchell," he said slowly, "do you know who this is?" Sarah shook her head. "No, sir. I've never seen her before in my life." The elderly woman turned to face Sarah directly for the first time. Her eyes were kind but carried a weight of experience that spoke of decades of difficult decisions and hidden sacrifices. "Hello, Sarah," she said softly. "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. There's so much I wanted to tell you over the years, but I was never allowed to make contact." The confusion on Sarah's face deepened. "I don't understand. Who are you?" Before the woman could answer, Colonel Harrison's voice cut through the silence. His words would change everything that everyone in that room thought they knew about rank, authority, and the true meaning of military service. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying a mix of awe and respect that nobody had ever heard from him before. "I need to inform you that this ceremony must be conducted very differently than planned." He paused, looking once more at the documents in his hands as if he still couldn't believe what he was reading. "The woman standing before us holds a rank and position that I was not previously aware of. According to these classified documents, which have just been declassified for this specific purpose, she has authority that supersedes not only my own, but that of virtually every officer in the United States military." The auditorium erupted in whispers and gasps. Sarah felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. Nothing made sense anymore. This elderly woman in civilian clothes apparently outranked one of the most powerful officers on the base? The woman stepped forward and addressed the crowd directly. "I apologize for the disruption, but it was necessary. What you're about to learn has been kept secret for over 30 years, and it directly affects Captain Mitchell in ways that she never knew." The woman walked slowly toward Sarah, each step measured and deliberate. The entire auditorium remained frozen in stunned silence as she approached the young captain who stood rigid at attention, her mind racing with questions that seemed to have no logical answers. "My name is General Margaret Elizabeth Mitchell," the woman announced, her voice carrying across the silent room with natural authority. "And, Sarah, I'm your aunt." Sarah's knees nearly buckled. She had grown up believing she had no living relatives besides her parents. Her father had always told her that his family was small and that most of his relatives had died before she was born. Now this woman was claiming to be her aunt and apparently held one of the highest ranks in the military? Colonel Harrison studied the documents in his hands more carefully. "According to these files, General Mitchell, you hold the rank of Lieutenant General in Army Intelligence, with Special Operations Authority dating back to 1985. Your service record is almost entirely classified." General Mitchell nodded. "That's correct, Colonel. For the past 35 years, I've been involved in operations that required complete secrecy. My identity, my family connections, and even my existence had to be hidden from most military personnel, including my own relatives." Sarah's father stood up in the audience, his face pale with shock and recognition. "Margaret? Maggie, is that really you?" The general turned toward her brother with tears forming in her eyes.
Hello, Tommy. It's been a long time.
The emotional reunion between siblings who hadn't seen each other in decades added another layer of complexity to an already extraordinary situation. Sarah's mother gripped her husband's arm, trying to process the revelation that her sister-in-law, whom she had been told died in a car accident 30 years ago, was actually alive and, apparently, one of the most highly ranked officers in the military.
Dad, Sarah said, her voice barely audible, you told me Aunt Margaret died when I was a baby.
Her father's eyes filled with pain.
That's what I was told to say, Sarah.
2 men in suits came to our farm when you were just 2 years old. They said Margaret had died in an accident, and that for national security reasons, we could never speak of her again. They said if we ever mentioned her name or tried to find out what really happened, it could put our entire family in danger. General Mitchell stepped closer to her brother.
I'm sorry, Tommy.
I wanted to tell you the truth so many times, but the work I was doing was too dangerous. If our enemies had known I had family, they would have used you to get to me. Keeping you safe meant letting you believe I was dead. Colonel Harrison cleared his throat. General Mitchell, with all due respect, I need to understand the chain of command here. These documents indicate that you have authority over special operations, but I've never heard of you in any briefings or communications.
The general smiled slightly. Colonel, that was exactly the point. My unit operates independently of normal military command structures. We report directly to the Joint Chiefs and handle situations that require complete deniability. Most officers at your level would never know we exist.
She pulled out another set of documents from her folder. These orders, dated yesterday, officially declassify my identity and authorize me to reveal my connection to Captain Mitchell. The reason for this declassification is related to a mission that was completed successfully last month.
Sarah found her voice. What kind of mission?
General Mitchell looked at her niece with pride and sadness mixed in her expression. For the past 5 years, we've been tracking a terrorist network that was planning attacks on military bases across the United States. The operation required deep cover infiltration that put several agents at extreme risk. Last month, we finally captured the entire network, including their leader. She paused, looking around the room. The success of that mission depended heavily on intelligence that was unknowingly provided by someone very close to me.
Colonel Harrison frowned. I don't understand. How could someone unknowingly provide intelligence? Captain Mitchell, the general said, turning back to Sarah, do you remember the cultural advisor you worked with during your deployment in Syria? The one who helped you plan the rescue mission that earned you the Bronze Star? Sarah nodded slowly. Yes, his name was Dr. Khalil. He was incredibly helpful in understanding local customs and identifying safe routes through the area.
Dr. Khalil was one of our deep cover agents, General Mitchell revealed. He was tasked with monitoring terrorist communications in that region. But his primary mission was to observe and report on a specific American officer who had caught our attention. The color drained from Sarah's face. You were watching me? We were protecting you, the general corrected gently. 3 years ago, we intercepted communications indicating that the terrorist network had identified several American military officers as potential targets for kidnapping or assassination. Your name was on that list. The auditorium erupted in shocked murmurs. Sarah's parents looked horrified at the thought that their daughter had been in even greater danger than they realized. General Mitchell continued. Rather than simply pulling you out of the field, which would have alerted the terrorists that we knew about their plans, we decided to provide you with protection without your knowledge. Dr. Khalil was assigned to your unit specifically to watch over you and feed intelligence back to us about any threats in your area. Colonel Harrison was still processing the implications. So the rescue mission that Captain Mitchell led was actually a carefully orchestrated operation designed to eliminate 3 key members of the terrorist network while making it appear to be a routine humanitarian mission, the general finished. Sarah's natural leadership abilities and tactical skills made her the perfect unknowing agent for the operation. Sarah felt overwhelmed. Everything she thought she knew about her recent military service was being rewritten before her eyes.
So my Bronze Star was based on a lie? Absolutely not, General Mitchell said firmly. Your actions during that mission were entirely your own.
Dr. Khalil provided information and guidance, but every decision you made, every life you saved, every risk you took was genuine. The terrorist targets we needed to eliminate were actually holding civilians hostage. By rescuing those civilians, you accomplished both humanitarian and intelligence objectives. She moved closer to Sarah. In fact, your performance during that mission was so exceptional that it confirmed something we had suspected for years.
Which was what? Sarah asked.
General Mitchell smiled with obvious pride. That you had inherited the same natural aptitude for strategic thinking and leadership that runs in our family.
Sarah, the reason I'm revealing myself now is because I want to offer you the opportunity to join my unit.
The room fell silent again. This was clearly not what anyone had expected when they came to watch a routine promotion ceremony.
Colonel Harrison looked at the documents again. General, are you saying that Captain Mitchell would be transferred out of my command?
Not exactly, Colonel, the general replied. She would maintain her regular duties and rank, but she would also take on additional responsibilities with my Special Operations Unit. It would require a significant security clearance upgrade and extensive additional training.
Sarah's mind was reeling. What kind of responsibilities?
The same kind of work I've been doing for 35 years, General Mitchell explained. Protecting American interests through intelligence gathering, counterterrorism operations, and strategic interventions that can never be officially acknowledged. She looked around the room at all the faces staring back at her. The work is dangerous, Sarah. It requires making sacrifices that most people can't understand. For 35 years, I've missed birthdays, holidays, and family gatherings. I've watched from a distance as you grew up, graduated from high school, entered the military, and became the exceptional officer you are today. Tears were now flowing freely down the general's cheeks. I've carried photos of you in my wallet for 15 years, but I could never contact you, never let you know how proud I was of your accomplishments. When I learned that you were being targeted by terrorists, it became personal for me in a way that I had never experienced before.
Sarah's father stood up again. Maggie, what are you asking our daughter to do?
General Mitchell turned to her brother.
I'm asking her to consider following in my footsteps, Tommy. But, unlike me, she wouldn't have to disappear completely. The nature of modern intelligence work allows for more flexibility than when I started. She could maintain her relationships with family while still serving her country in ways that most people never even know exist. The weight of the decision hung heavy in the air. Sarah looked at her parents, at Colonel Harrison, at the hundreds of people in the auditorium who were witnessing this unprecedented revelation.
How long do I have to decide? She asked finally.
Take all the time you need, the general replied. But, understand that this offer won't remain open indefinitely.
The work we do requires people who can make quick decisions under pressure, and the training program only begins twice a year.
Colonel Harrison stepped forward. General Mitchell, what happens to today's ceremony? Do we continue with the promotion? The general looked at the colonel with a mixture of authority and respect.
Actually, Colonel, there's one more thing you need to know. General Mitchell reached into her folder one final time and pulled out a sealed envelope marked with official Pentagon stamps. The tension in the room, which everyone thought had reached its peak, somehow managed to intensify even further. Colonel Harrison, she said, handing him the envelope, these are orders that were classified until this moment. They pertain directly to Captain Mitchell's promotion today. With trembling hands, Colonel Harrison broke the seal and began reading. As his eyes moved across the page, his expression changed from confusion to complete astonishment. He read the document twice before looking up at General Mitchell. This can't be correct, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I assure you it is, Colonel, the general replied calmly. Those orders come directly from the Secretary of Defense and have been approved by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Sarah watched the exchange with growing anxiety. What do the orders say? Colonel Harrison looked at her with an expression she had never seen before, a mixture of respect, amazement, and something that almost looked like fear. Captain Mitchell, according to these orders, you're not being promoted to major as we planned today.
The auditorium was so quiet that people could hear their own heartbeats.
Sarah felt her world shifting once again, wondering if there were any more surprises that could possibly be revealed.
Then, what's happening to me? She asked. General Mitchell stepped forward and spoke with quiet authority.
Sarah, effective immediately, you're being promoted to lieutenant colonel, with a special designation that gives you authority over cross-branch intelligence operations.
The auditorium erupted.
Promoting someone from captain to lieutenant colonel was virtually unheard of, especially for someone Sarah's age. Such promotions typically took 15 to 20 years to achieve, and she was accomplishing it in just 15 years of service.
Colonel Harrison stared at the orders again. General, this promotion gives Captain Mitchell authority that rivals my own. How is this possible?
It's possible because of her performance record, her security clearance approval, and her family connection to my unit, General Mitchell explained. For the past 3 years, while Sarah was unknowingly helping us with our operations, her actions were being evaluated by the highest levels of military intelligence. Her tactical thinking, her ability to adapt under pressure, and her absolute integrity made her an ideal candidate for accelerated advancement.
Sarah's father called out from the audience. Maggie, what does this mean for Sarah's safety?
The general turned to address her brother directly.
Tommy, I won't lie to you.
The work will be dangerous. But Sarah has already proven that she can handle herself in hostile situations. And, unlike my generation, today's intelligence officers have better support, better technology, and better extraction capabilities when missions go wrong. She looked back at Sarah. More importantly, the terrorist network that was targeting you has been completely dismantled.
The threat that brought you to our attention no longer exists. Colonel Harrison was still processing the implications of the orders.
Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, he said, using Sarah's new rank for the first time, according to these documents, you now outrank every officer on this base except for General Morrison, who's currently deployed overseas.
The weight of this revelation settled over everyone in the auditorium.
Sarah, who had walked into the ceremony as a captain expecting a routine promotion to major, was now suddenly one of the highest-ranking officers on the entire base. Furthermore, the colonel continued reading, you're being assigned as the liaison between Fort Bradley and the Special Operations Intelligence Division, reporting directly to General Mitchell.
Sarah felt dizzy. Everything was happening too fast.
Aunt Margaret, she said, using the family connection for the first time, I need to understand what you're really asking of me. General Mitchell's expression softened.
I'm asking you to help me bridge the gap between traditional military operations and modern intelligence work. For too long, these two worlds have operated separately, sometimes working against each other inadvertently.
We need officers who understand both sides. She gestured toward the crowd. Your experience with regular army operations, combined with your natural aptitude for strategic thinking, makes you uniquely qualified to help us coordinate better between departments. Colonel Harrison set down the orders and looked directly at Sarah. Lieutenant Colonel, I have to say that in 28 years of military service, I have never witnessed anything like what's happened here today. The authority you now hold means that you could technically override my decisions regarding base operations.
Sarah shook her head quickly. Sir, that's not something I would ever want to do. You have far more experience than I do.
Which brings me to another point in these orders, the colonel continued. You're being assigned a special advisor to help you transition into your new role. He looked at General Mitchell.
I assumed that advisor would be you, General?
Actually, no, the general replied with a slight smile. The advisor will be Dr. Khalil, who you knew as your cultural liaison in Syria. It turns out he's not just an intelligence agent, he's also a lieutenant colonel in Army intelligence with 20 years of experience in special operations.
Sarah's jaw dropped. Dr. Khalil is military?
Deep cover military intelligence, General Mitchell confirmed. His expertise in both Middle Eastern culture and military strategy makes him an ideal mentor for your new position. He'll be arriving at Fort Bradley next week to begin working with you. The ceremony, which had started as a simple promotion event, had transformed into something that would be talked about on the base for decades to come. Sarah looked around at the faces of her fellow soldiers, her family, and the distinguished guests who had witnessed this unprecedented chain of events.
I have one question, Sarah said finally. Why reveal everything now? Why not continue operating in secret? General Mitchell smiled with genuine warmth for the first time since entering the auditorium. Because the nature of threats facing our country has changed, Sarah. The old model of completely compartmentalized intelligence operations isn't sufficient anymore. We need officers who can work openly with traditional military units while still maintaining the security necessary for sensitive operations. She paused, looking around the room. And, frankly, after 35 years of working in shadows, I wanted the chance to stand in front of my family and my colleagues and acknowledge the exceptional officer that my niece has become. Colonel Harrison stepped forward and extended his hand to Sarah. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, it has been an honor serving with you, and I look forward to continuing to work under your guidance in your new capacity. The formality of the gesture, coming from a man who had been her commanding officer just minutes before, drove home the magnitude of how much her life had just changed. Sarah shook his hand, then turned to address the auditorium. I want everyone here to know that despite these new responsibilities, my commitment to the soldiers under my command remains unchanged. The work we do here at Fort Bradley is vital to our national security, and I will do everything in my power to support that mission. The crowd erupted in applause. Sarah's parents made their way to the front of the auditorium, both crying tears of pride and relief. Her father embraced his sister for the first time in over 30 years, while her mother struggled to process the fact that her daughter had just become one of the most powerful military officers in the region. As the formal ceremony concluded and people began to leave the auditorium, General Mitchell pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. You don't have to make any decisions about joining my unit today, she said quietly. Take time to process everything that's happened. Talk to your family, talk to your fellow officers. The opportunity will remain open. Sarah nodded gratefully. Thank you. This is all overwhelming. I understand completely, the general replied. When I was first recruited for intelligence work, I had no idea what I was getting into. But I've never regretted the choice, even with all the sacrifices it required. She looked at her niece with obvious affection. Whatever you decide, Sarah, I want you to know how proud I am of the woman you've become. Your parents raised an exceptional daughter. As the crowd dispersed and the auditorium slowly emptied, Sarah stood alone for a moment, still wearing her dress blues but now bearing the insignia of a lieutenant colonel. She thought about the simple promotion ceremony she had expected to attend that morning, and how dramatically her entire life had changed in the span of just a few hours. The elderly woman in the black dress who had walked into the auditorium unnoticed had revealed herself to be one of the most powerful people in the American military. The family she thought she knew had hidden connections to some of the country's most classified operations. And she herself had unknowingly been part of intelligence missions that helped save countless lives. As she finally left the auditorium and stepped out into the afternoon sunshine, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell realized that her real military career was just beginning. The question now was whether she was ready to follow in her aunt's footsteps and enter a world where success was measured not by public recognition, but by threats neutralized and lives saved in complete secrecy. The ceremony that had stopped cold when her aunt declared her authority had ended with Sarah facing the biggest decision of her life. But, for the first time since the morning began, she felt ready to make that choice.